turning 48 years old yesterday, one of the greatest suspense films ever made, and Dustin Hoffman's single best performance, Marathon Man.
Is it safe?
I know who you are, you murderer. Come on! They've been after me for 2 hours!
Is it safe?
And we're back, like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your happy hump day, I hope, early evening on Wednesday here with me in New York. Once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. So as you can see, I'm not just in the car, but I'm driving. You'll have to bear with me. I don't want to crash the car, but this is one of those safe driving automobiles, and I'm going to drive safely. So sorry if I don't make as much eye contact as I try to, but I once again will attempt to make really good, engaging content for you today. So yesterday marked the 48th anniversary of the release of a film that is very much a product of its time, but a film which is also, from different perspectives, timeless. The movie in question was John Schlesinger's 1976 suspense thriller, Marathon Man. And Marathon Man is adapted from the novel of the same title, 1974 novel, which would now be 50 years old, of course, by the extraordinary Oscar-winning author and screenwriter, nobody did it better than this guy, William Goldman, who also wrote the book, The Princess Bride, and the script for the movie. He wrote the screenplays for Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, All the President's Men, and he also did a lot of screenplays where the movie wasn't that good, but he is one of the acknowledged dual threat masters in the history of really literature. He was a great book author who was also a terrific screenwriter. And you could argue he was better at one or the other. It doesn't really matter. He was great. And he was also a terrific interview. You can find a lot of interviews with him. He wrote books on his experiences in the movie business. Adventures in the Screen Trade was 1983. And he wrote a hilarious book, and I think it came out in the early 2000s, called Which Lie Did I Tell? Which, if you're really interested in the movie business, the two books that are must-reads, Which Lie Did I Tell? And Julie Salamon's The Devil's Candy, about the disastrous movie version of Tom Wolfe's runaway best-selling novel, my dad's #1 favorite fiction book of all time, The Bonfire of the Vanities. But Marathon Man, the movie is a product of its time, as I mentioned, but to be more precise, the 1970s were stop me if you've heard this before, they were a very dark time in America. The country was either still in Vietnam or just coming out of it. There was the gas shortage, which was really not a gas shortage. There were just a lot of negative things going on in the 70s. Free love era, disco hadn't happened yet. There was just a lot of angst, kind of like today, but it was different because it was the 70s. And there was a certain kind of paranoia type story, which was very popular in Hollywood, and it was not created in a vacuum. Culture informs movies. Movies reflect on culture. This is not necessarily something I only learned in film school. Yeah, I did. But it is something that is very obvious. And if you have the people being in a constant state of unease and angst, bordering on fear, the general idea is that movies are going to reflect that. And the 1970s were a time, the only time, where you have a lot of movies with big stars either getting bumped off or not fulfilling their objectives in the world of the story, or fulfilling their objectives in the world of the story, but not really winning in a conventional sense. And because I'm not going to spoil Marathon Man, I'm going to point to Dirty Harry being an example. Because Dirty Harry, on the surface, is a typical good versus evil story. A tough San Francisco cop who gets fucked with one too many times while tracking a serial killer, decides to more or less take the law into his own hands, but he doesn't exactly, because his process is still lawful. But he basically, even though he wins, he doesn't really win. He achieves his objective, but at what cost? So Marathon Man is a paranoia thriller. And Dustin Hoffman's buddy, who he would soon make All the President's Men with, Robert Redford, did a film right around the same time, also set and shot mostly in New York City, called 3 Days of the Condor. In 3 Days of the Condor, Robert Redford plays a CIA analyst whose entire, spoiler alert, his entire team gets bumped off because reasons, Russia, I don't know, and he's on the run. Their other buddy, the great Warren Beatty, 1974, The Parallax View, that's a paranoia story. A bunch of United States senators and congressmen are getting bumped off, and Warren Beatty's trying to figure out what's happened or what's happening. Maybe he's going to get bumped off too. And even Jack Nicholson, the triumvirate, right? Not the triumvirate, the quartet of fucking legends. Beatty, Hoffman, Redford, Nicholson. Jack Nicholson in Chinatown, that's another paranoia thriller, where the hero doesn't exactly achieve his objective, or maybe doesn't even come close to achieving his objective, or maybe he never even had a chance to achieve his goals. Marathon Man has Dustin Hoffman in what I believe to be his single finest performance. In the lead role of Thomas Babington Levy. He goes by Babe. And the film deals with Nazis emerging from seclusion. It's not a period piece. Chinatown is a period piece. Marathon Man is set in the New York City of the 1970s. But when I say things like Nazis emerging from seclusion, World War II had ended 3 decades prior. So there would be members, in theory, of the Nazi high command who would still be, they could be in their 60s, they could even be in their late 50s, maybe they're in their 70s. This movie deals with a lot of issues which are very uncomfortable, mirroring the image and the process that so many Americans were feeling as the Vietnam era, the disaster of the Vietnam War, and the terrible cost that so many Americans paid even if they didn't go overseas. It was just an awful time in the country for so many, normal, hardworking people, families. Just a bad time. And in the world of Marathon Man, and this is the same in the book as the movie, we meet Babe Levy. He is a brilliant graduate student, Dustin Hoffman, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, 8 years earlier in the famous Mike Nichols, The Graduate. This is not that guy. This guy is a graduate student, and it's kind of a tribute to the genetic freak that Dustin Hoffman was, that he's pushing 40 in real life, and he still looks like a fucking kid. He looks like he's in his late 20s, and Dustin Hoffman was just such an incredible shape. But he plays a very angry, cranky genius. And it is unlike any other Dustin Hoffman performance in the sense that he does not give a shit if we like him. He doesn't care if the other characters in the story like him. He has a chip on his shoulder. He is mad because his dad, a renowned academic, got fucked because of the Red Scare. And the quiet part that I'm going to say out loud, it wasn't just that his dad was a suspected communist, it was that his dad was Jewish. It was both. And so Thomas Babington Levy is not only looking to redeem his father's good name, because my dad was no fucking communist, asshole. It's none of your goddamn business what religion he or I ascribe to. We're supposed to have that kind of freedom in this country. And he doesn't say that. He doesn't verbalize that. But when you start talking about Nazis, when you start talking about World War II, well, then you're having a different kind of conversation. And if the movie is going to ultimately come down to one lone, much put upon, beaten down Jewish person rising up to take the head off of a fucking Nazi, well, you might have a moment where you get to do that. And all of those things that I said, some are spoken about, some are merely implied. but they are all right there in the text. You don't have to get all of this to be interested in this movie. This functions as a suspense thriller, and just at the level of suspense thriller, it is one of the best of the form ever made. It is way more suspenseful. Not saying it's a better movie than Chinatown. It is way more suspenseful than Chinatown, way more suspenseful than The Parallax View, the thriller that I mentioned with Warren Beatty, and not even close. 3 Days of the Condor is also a suspense thriller, but it has long stretches where it is very, very kind of almost a relaxed atmosphere. Even though Redford could get bumped off at any moment, the level of tension in Marathon Man is off the charts. And the late, great Oscar-winning producer Robert Evans, who also had a hand in Chinatown, Robert Evans, in his incredible long career, Dustin Hoffman in Wag the Dog 20 years later basically plays Robert Evans. Even though his character's name is Stanley Moss, he is very clearly playing his old buddy, Robert Evans. And he got an Oscar nomination. There are many people to this day that will say Dustin should have taken the Oscar. He's so good, basically playing his buddy, Robert Evans. But Robert Evans said in his entire career, there was only one movie where he, as the coordinating producer, the point man, if you will, had decided before production, when they were just getting the pieces together in Goldman and the script and everything, and he's talked about this, you can find interviews, and there's an amazing documentary on Robert Evans called The Kid Stays in the Picture. He's the title character in that. He's the kid. Robert Evans was a young actor, a very attractive man, who was such a character and such an incredible deal-making kind of a spirit that he ended up becoming top 5 greatest producers in the history of Hollywood. Harvey Weinstein, but not a complete fucking asshole. But Robert Evans has said in his entire career, the only movie where each actor or actress he targeted for a major role, he got them all. He wanted Mart Keller for the female lead, got her. He wanted Dustin to play Babe, got him. He wanted Roy Scheider for Babe's brother Doc, or Scylla. He got him. He wanted William Devane for the role of Janeway, which is a much more involved role in the book than in the movie. There's just certain things that you can't really get into. You can't get into everything in a movie that you get into in the book. But rest assured, the character of Janeway is much more important in the book than he is in the movie. And he's critically important in the movie. But there is more backstory with him and Roy Scheider's character of the brother Doc, or Scylla, if you prefer. And he wanted Lord Laurence Olivier to play the Nazi Christian Zell, the Nazi dentist. Laurence Olivier's health had been very poor, and Lloyd's of London would not insure Laurence Olivier to do this movie. And I don't know how he did it, but Robert Evans, I feel like, it's almost ridiculous, like he put up his own, like, millions of dollars, whatever it was. He was so desperate because Olivier was interested, but they just didn't think he could handle the work. It wasn't even that he was that old. Yeah, he was old. He was 60. It wasn't like he was in his 90s. Excuse me. Boris Karloff was still working in his early 80s. And they were still insuring him, but he wasn't working on major Hollywood productions. It's different. They were able to figure out a way to insure Lord Laurence Olivier. And so they got the cast together, and they made this extraordinary film, which goes all over the globe. And I can't really even sum up the plot. But basically, Dustin Hoffman's Babe gets involved. Sorry, still getting over that cold. He and his brother get involved with Lord Laurence Olivier's Nazi dentist, Christian Zell, whose brother has a key to a safety deposit box where there is an enormous stash of ill-gotten diamonds. And the scumbag thuggery of this guy, who while he was in occupied territories, stole countless millions in money and jewels from you-know-who. From the people of the same faith of Dustin Hoffman, character of Babe, and his brother. So there is the idea of survival, that Babe just wants to survive. But then there is the idea of, I'm tired of running. And the irony of Marathon Man, he wants to be an Olympic runner. And his idol is the famous Ethiopian Olympic miler and gold medalist, Abebe Bikila, who famously ran barefoot. There is an extraordinary chase sequence. It's even more elongated in the book, but there is an incredible chase sequence in this movie where Dustin Hoffman has been beaten to within an inch of his life and manages to wriggle free. Sorry for the mild spoilers. Manages to wriggle free, and he takes off on foot. It is easily a top 10 greatest chase sequences ever. And without the backstory of his obsession with Abebe Bikila and the idea of running barefoot even on pavement, it's just extraordinary. And Dustin obviously sells the desperation beautifully. But you have the idea of a young Jewish man beaten down by oppressors and just continues to get beaten down. And finally, it's like what Dustin Hoffman's character a few years earlier in Sam Peckinpah's Straw Dogs, he plays a similar kind of intellectual who spends most of the movie getting beat on, getting made fun of, and getting condescended to. And then he reaches a moment where his wife says, honey, let's call the police. And he goes, no, I'm going to defend this house. Let the motherfuckers come at me. Dustin Hoffman has a moment in Marathon Man where he just pretty much says, fuck them all. I'm coming to get you. It's almost like Sylvester Stallone Rambo 10 years later. Tell us where you are, we'll come get you. No, I'm coming to get you. Where he stops playing defense and he just decides, I'm going after him. I'm going to take that Nazi motherfucker out myself. Let's fucking go. And the thing is that Dustin Hoffman, with this movie, he started to get the reputation for being a little bit difficult. And he lampooned that. And this is one reason why he's a likable actor and a likable personality, because he didn't take himself too seriously. The movie Tootsie, the fact that his character of Michael Dorsey can't get work, even though everybody who works with him says he's a brilliant actor, he's just tough to get along with, Dustin Hoffman was making fun of him himself. And one thing that audiences like and Hollywood likes is when people don't take themselves too seriously, when they can laugh at themselves. But Dustin Hoffman in this movie gave so much. And if you watch it for the first time, he gives so much of himself. It doesn't feel like he's acting. If we don't know who this is, it feels like we are living the worst month of Thomas Babington Levy's life. We are watching him go through it in real time. It is an extraordinary performance by one of the greatest actors to ever work in the movie business, certainly the most resourceful of his generation. And the guys I mentioned, you can flip a coin: Nicholson, Beatty, Redford, and Dustin. I think that Dustin has the most range and is the most resourceful. But what he does here, he reaches something that's just something sublime and almost a level of acting nirvana, where he doesn't really even appear to be acting. He is this character. Whereas brilliant technical performances like what he did a few years later as Ted Kramer when he won his first Best Actor Oscar for Kramer versus Kramer, and just the technical mastery, the wizardry of Rain Man. But Rain Man feels like a performance. It does. To me, it feels like a performance, as does Ted Kramer. And let's face it, the scene with the kid where the kid wants to eat the ice cream and it's brilliant. But in this movie, he makes you feel, even though his character is not likable, Thomas Babington Levy is an unlikable, cranky asshole. His heart's in the right place. And nobody deserves to go through what he went through, losing his father the way that he did. And we feel his pain. And when he rises, even if we say this guy's an asshole, we rejoice. We rejoice in his rise because he's taken shit long enough. He's had to swallow shit about his old man long enough. And he's had people beating on him long enough. So the story goes, and Daniel Day-Lewis has even mentioned this, you can find this in an interview, there is an apocryphal story that when Lord Laurence Olivier, and there's a wonderful picture you can also find on Google. I'm sorry if I'm like acting as if I want you to do all this work, but there's a wonderful picture of Lord Laurence Olivier and Dustin Hoffman in character, but between setups, somewhere in Manhattan. And Olivier has a very kind of exasperated expression on his face, and Dustin Hoffman is behind him making a funny face, just kind of goofing on him, but doing it in a very sweet way. The story goes that when the two guys, because they don't spend that much of the movie together, not surprisingly, but when the two guys got together to film, Dustin Hoffman looked horrendous. Now, his character has basically been to hell and back. He's supposed to look like shit, but Dustin Hoffman looked even worse. They had him in makeup, yes, but he looked like a guy who hadn't slept in days and hadn't showered in a month. So when Laurence Olivier saw him on that day, he said, "My dear boy, are you okay?" And Dustin Hoffman very earnestly, who loved working with Olivier, everybody was so excited, they couldn't believe he was going to do this movie. He said, I just got into character. I've been up for the last 96 hours. I haven't showered, haven't brushed my hair. He goes into this whole stuff. And Olivier supposedly said, "Have you tried acting?" And that's the quote. Or "You might try acting, it's easier." But that's the quote that is remembered. But Olivier later said that's not entirely what happened. Because after I said that, I then said, "Who am I to talk?" Meaning that he, Olivier, had also gone to very extreme lengths to get himself into the proper character, into the right mindset. That he also hurt himself physically, emotionally, psychologically to find a character, to find a beat, to find a moment. But Dustin Hoffman, especially in the second half, it's just extraordinary film acting. Even as this crazy, bonkers suspense story is unfolding, and we really don't know how it's going to turn out because there's a lot of different things which we could we run it through in the mental meat grinder. There's a lot of different ways that it could play out, and there are it's the sort of story where there's a lot of twists. This doesn't feel like a twisty kind of film, but it is. There are a lot of shifting allegiances. And one thing that I will kind of spoil, it's not really a spoiler, there are certain things that you do in a book that you literally can't replicate in a movie. Now, I read Marathon Man in 1991 before seeing the movie. The movie was not that readily available. It wasn't a sort of film that the local Blockbuster would have. You had to kind of get lucky to find it in a video store. So my dad had William Goldman's novel on the shelf at home, just in Massapequa. So I read the book, and Goldman, it's the sort of story where you meet a whole bunch of characters, one at a time, and then you figure their paths will converge. So you meet Babe, and you meet a character, you meet his brother Doc, that's the Roy Scheider character in the movie, and you meet Christian Zell, the Nazi dentist who is coming to the States. He's coming out of seclusion. I think he's supposed to be in Bolivia, maybe it's Chile, wherever he is, he's somewhere in, I think in Central America. We meet a character called Scylla in the book. And Scylla is basically James Bond, but a much more vicious American James Bond. He is way more likely to not just kill you, but gut you like a fish. He is a merciless CIA-type agent, but they're in a organization called the Division. They're very, very dirty ops kind of stuff. And he's probably ex-military. So we meet this guy called Scylla, and we go half the book thinking that Scylla is in a relationship with a woman named Janie. And then with a moment of shock, we realize that Scylla is Doc, Dustin Hoffman's brother. And Janie is not a woman, but Peter Janeway, who is someone that works with Scylla in the Division. So you can do this in a book and you say, "Oh my God, it's the same guy." Well, in a movie, we know it's the same guy because anytime we see Roy Scheider, he's either Doc or he's Scylla. This was, I believe, Roy Scheider's first movie after Jaws, where of course he plays the lead role of, Chief Brody. He's really good in this movie as this guy who is pretending to his brother to be a reputable businessman, and his brother doesn't know that he's a super spy. He goes around the world bumping people off mostly and trying not to get bumped off himself. The moments of suspense and tension and the kind of real world feel and the very creepy musical score by Michael Small. What a great musical score. I can't even, I'm not going to do it here, but it is a great score because it gets all of the unease, all of the kind of just below the surface fear that so many people were experiencing in the mid-1970s, and just a sense of paranoia. If Paranoia could be a musical score, it would be the musical score from this movie. Now, I'm not going to spoil anything else. This is a great film, a product of its time, but even though there are a lot of historical references which now seem more like artifacts, it still plays. It is a great suspense film. And there are later movies, such as Jordan Peele's Get Out, which very clearly take cues from the level of suspense. And there's that famous scene in Get Out where Daniel Kaluuya's character is kind of, I don't know, is he strapped to a chair? But Daniel Kaluuya's character is in a chair and doesn't want to be there. And he basically is undergoing some form of torture. It's not the same. It is very obvious that Jordan Peele loves this movie. And that scene is very much an homage to a famous scene in this film between Lord Laurence Olivier and Dustin Hoffman. Really two of the great film actors dueling it out from a distance at certain points, but one-on-one at other points. And when I tell you that Olivier rises to the occasion, what a fucking legend. Whether or not he was really feeling like crap, he had a blast making this movie. And there is an incredible shot, if you are interested, this is also on YouTube, when filming wrapped. The cast and crew got a cake. It was like a belated birthday for Olivier. Everybody was so happy that he had been able to make this movie, and he had such joy when he realized that everyone on the cast and crew was just thanking him for being there and that they were able to make a movie with one of their idols. He started crying, and he wasn't acting. He was so moved and touched, and Dustin is there laughing, and everybody's clapping. It was a beautiful moment, and it just showed that there was a level of camaraderie during the making of this movie that was not the norm, and this is now almost 50 years ago. But as we speak, Marathon Man is streaming free if you get Paramount and Showtime, or Showtime. It's on both of those. Like if you subscribe to Paramount Plus, you get Showtime as a kind of bonus. But it's also, it's been on and off with Amazon Prime. It's been on Tubi, but you should be able to find it streaming free somewhere. It gets my absolute highest recommendation. It is a top 10 greatest suspense film ever made, and an extraordinary performance from the most resourceful actor to come on the scene since the 60s, in my opinion, Dustin Hoffman. Marathon Man, 48 years old yesterday. Unbelievable. This has been episode 324 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for taking this early evening drive with me here in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Till then,